So we did an unboxing of this lens. This is the f0.95 35 millimeter lens for digital cameras with the APS-C sensor. And I've had a chance to take it out, shoot some photos with it, spend a little time with it, get an idea of what it's like to use it. Let's take a look at some of the photos and see if this is a keeper or not. So let's jump into the video and see what we think about the TTArtisan f0.95 35 millimeter lens. So before we get into the discussion, let's do a quick recap of the lens. So this is, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is an f0.95 lens. It's 35 millimeters, and it's intended to be used on a crop censored body. In addition to the Sony E-mount, this is also available for other mirrorless cameras, including Fuji. I think Micro Four Thirds, where it really becomes a 70 millimeter lens, portrait lens, if you will. And also, I can't recall if it was also available for the Canon and Nikon mirrorless. Wouldn't surprise me if it is, because that would make sense. This is a fairly lightweight lens. It's all metal barrel and all metal construction, I guess I should say, all metal and glass. There doesn't appear to be any. There doesn't appear to be plastic used in any of the construction, so it's a bit of a throwback in a good way. It feels very high quality. Focusing is very smooth. As I mentioned, there's these little scallop cutouts on the circumference of the barrel and the focusing ring. And the front has, the aperture ring also has these little small scalloped portions cut out of the body. And that's to provide you with some friction for changing the aperture. Apertures run from 0.95 all the way down to f16. There's always been a belief that if you close the lens down further than f11 and f16 with certain lens designs, it will actually degrade the image. It's actually not a belief. I believe it's based on scientific fact. This uses 10 blades in the aperture, and you'll notice that they do not form a perfect circle. You'll see that small rosette pattern at the larger apertures. This lens has a little bit of weight to it. It's not extremely heavy, but it does have some weight to it, and that would make sense considering the fact that it's all metal. There are 7 elements in 5 groups, and I've looked at it, and it appears to be a planar type design. And that would make sense because the planar has become the dominant lens design for many lenses today. Although once you get 35 millimeter, things can change, and sometimes you'll see a slightly different lens design. Before we move on, let's see what this lens weighs. 8.7 ounces. And so, as I mentioned, that's not an overly heavy lens. I happen to have a Carl Zeiss f1.4 50 millimeter lens, and that'd be, this is actually was made for SLRs. So let's see what that weighs in comparison. That weighs 11.6 ounces, and a physical side by side, you can see how much larger the Carl Zeiss lens is. Now I don't have a Noctilux, and once again, it's because I'm not made of money. And I didn't get lucky and happened to find one for $10 on eBay, or even $100 on eBay. However, and that's a big however, I happen to have something that's very special, and that would be the Canon 0.95 lens. This is a massive lens in terms of its size and its weight. So here it is, and let's check the weight of this. This should tip the scales. 1 pound 5 ounces. So what is that? I think this one was 11 ounces. And so this one is a good, let's do the mental math, 5 plus 5, a good 10 ounces. Yeah, a good 10 ounces heavier. In a quick side-by-side with all 3 lenses, let's do an interesting side-by-side comparison. If I can keep them from rolling away. And let's put it on this side. Interestingly enough, they all seem to be roughly the same height, right? Flange to front, or flange to, yeah, front of the lens. And now you can see in diameter the size of each lens. So this one ends up being so the TTArtisan lens ends up being a very usable, very portable lens. One of the advantages that the Canon has that the SLR lens doesn't have is because this was intended for use on a rangefinder lens, it doesn't need that extra space that was built in by the mirror box. So when fitted with its adapter, it required hardly any space. However, SLR lenses required quite a bit more space, and once again that was because of the mirror box. And so now you can see how this begins to grow. So let's take flange to front. This is a nice little side-by-side comparison because you can really see the size of the planar lens. And remember, this is a 1.4. As far as production goes, I don't believe Zeiss made any high-speed production lenses. I believe it made a couple of special purpose, very high-speed lenses, but not for production mass consumption. The camera that I used this with was the Sony NEX7. You also can mount it to a Sony A7 or a Sony full-frame mirrorless, I guess I should say. However, when it's set up natively, it's going to vignette severely. See, and you can see what happens with the image circle. You can see how it really is heavily cut off in the corners. And that's expected because this lens wasn't intended for use on a full-frame camera. Now, if you turn on APS-C size capture, now you'll notice that you get full frame. So what it really does is it just crops the sensor. So the amount of capture within this sensor is the same as an APS-C camera. So what would be the advantage to using this one on this camera? It's going to be about the handling of the camera, and also, of course, the A7 does have a more advanced sensor. In actual use, I've never had a problem with the NEX7. I found that its images are really, really first rate. You can see what the package looks like with the A7, and it's a good looking camera. When mounted to the NEX7, it's a bit more compact than simply because you have a thinner body. So what do you get with this lens? Obviously you get a fast aperture, f/0.95. You also get a lens that was designed exclusively for a mirrorless camera. And where that's going to be noticeable is in your close focus distance. So, for example, the close focus distance is going to be probably about 1.1 feet, which is going to be roughly 13 inches maybe, 13, 14 inches. And with an SLR lens, you're going to get something similar. This close focuses down to, well, 1.5, maybe down to 1.4 feet. So slightly less than, it's probably going to be about 18 inches or so is my guess. Whereas when you look at the Canon, because it was a rangefinder, and rangefinders always have that difficulty of focusing closely, your close focus distance with this camera is going to be roughly 3 feet. So that's that's almost 3 times as great as the other two lenses. So always keep that in mind when you're taking a true rangefinder lens and adapting it to digital. One of the shortcomings is in that close focusing distance. What about the handling of this? Well, because it is all metal, it does feel a little bit front heavy when it's attached to it, but it's not to the point where you think, oh, this is really heavy, because it's not. I think it's fairly well balanced. The NEX7 and most of these APS-C cameras are lighter weight cameras. They're not heavy cameras. And so, there is a tendency for more of your weight to be at the front. However, because you're focusing manually, you don't really notice it. I found in use this was very, very simple to focus manually, although I did turn on the focus peaking. And focus peaking will provide a visible highlight in the viewfinder that shows when things are in focus and out of focus. I believe in some cases I magnified the view, and that did help. I think perhaps it might have been better if there had been fewer of these little scalloped cutouts here and maybe spaced a bit further apart, but that's a very personal thing. Of course, this lens was really made to be shot at open aperture because why else would you have an f/0.95 maximum aperture if you're not going to use it? If you're going to shoot it, 5.6 f/8 or whatever, then that sort of negates the purpose of buying one of these. The primary limitation of this lens is often you can't shoot this on a sunny day, at least not fully open. And the reason is because most of these cameras you can't dial that ISO. You can't dial the ISO down far enough to make this usable. Often these cameras are going to have a minimum ISO of, let's say, 100, and you would think 100 would be sufficient. Well, actually, if you had like ISO 25 or even 50, that would probably offer you more options. ISO 100, even on a sunny day, you're going to be maxing out your shutter speed, so you'll find that you have to close this down. Or if you're shooting portraits, for example, you're going to have to move your subject into the shade, which is never a bad idea anyway, because direct sunlight can be a bit too harsh when you're shooting portraits. At f/0.95, you're going to get really good separation between your subject and the background. Now, I did a short video. It was handheld, so you'll have to excuse the sort of the blur, and I didn't have one of those things attached to it where you can focus smoothly from start to finish. Now, the one thing that I did do with this lens is I purchased the lens hood. And I do this for most of my lenses. We'll try to keep a lens shade on most of my lenses. And, well, for the obvious reason is because it really helps to cut down on stray light. As part of my test of this lens, I purposely shot a scene, one without the lens shade and then one with the lens shade. And you can see those photos above. Because I wanted to be able to show what the difference would be between those two situations. For me, in addition to helping to reduce stray light from striking the lens, it also serves a secondary purpose of protecting this lens. And specifically against dents and dings. If you dent this filter, you remove it and throw it away and buy another one. If you dent the filter ring on the lens, that's a whole different matter. And I've encountered enough lenses that have dented filter rings to know that that happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So anything that you can do to protect the lens is always a good thing. By the way, this is a 52 millimeter thread filter. And it says right here. And if I did want to use a filter in front of the lens, I would then remove this, attach the filter, and then attach the lens hood. There is a point where it comes out too far, and then you'll see vignetting in the corner. But usually you can do one filter, including a polarizing filter, plus a lens shade, and you really shouldn't have any issues. I can't recall if they sell this in a silver mount, but I thought the black works out pretty well here. Regarding the physical look of the lens, this type of striping often was regarded to as zebra stripes. And so, I don't think I have to explain that. I'm not sure it was 1950s or 1960s, East German Carl Zeiss did the same thing. I think some other East German manufacturers did. And so here's one. So this is actually sort of chrome with black stripes, whereas this one was black with chrome stripes. But you can see the resemblance between the two. These always had their fans, and I imagine this will too. For this type of lens, it has a fairly decent throw. It's not too long and it's not too short. It's probably, what would you say? Well, this would be a quarter turn, 90 degrees, so it's maybe 100 degrees. from infinity all the way down to close focus. I actually enjoy using this camera quite a bit, and I think it could be useful in many situations. And what really makes this a nice combination is that it's compact. You know, it only weighs whatever I said it weighed, 10 ounces or 9 ounces or whatever that was, as compared with this. Obviously, the TTArtisan is not going to have the same prestige as the Canon 0.95 or the Noct Deluxe. But for those of us who really are looking just to shoot some photos, it's okay. You know, I'll give up that prestige. So do I think this is a good deal? I think this is a tremendous deal. What did this cost me? Maybe $160, give or take. So I think that's a tremendous deal for a lens that performs very admirably. I didn't do any optical tests. Most of my comments are just based on the photos that I took along the way, and I didn't do any portraits because I didn't know anybody who would agree to be in a video. You'll run into that at some point. I took some photos of my pets, and they were more than happy to agree to appear in this video. So after talking about how I like using this lens on the NEX7, I went ahead and mounted it to the Sony A7 Mark II, and made that change in the menus, and took it out for an afternoon, or took it out for the morning. The one thing about the A7 is I was able to dial the ISO down to ISO 50, so that took care of that problem that I was mentioning, in which I said you probably, with certain cameras, you can't dial the ISO down far enough to be able to use it in bright daylight, at least not wide open. And even then, I found out that I was still looking at, in certain situations, shutter speeds of like 1/4000th of a second. So that is something to keep in mind, depending on the camera that you mount this lens to. I found this TTArtisan mounted on the A7 to be a real nice package. It was easy to shoot. I like the handling of it. Essentially, the photos don't look that much different from those taken with the NEX7, because I wanted to be able to show the progression of focus from infinity down to the closest distance. Was I put the camera actually on this rail, on a split rail fence, and then I just focused from close distance all the way out to infinity. And you can see the progression of you can actually almost see the plane of focus as it moves first away from the camera and then back toward the camera. One thing I did notice when I was shooting wide open is that I don't know if you could call it ghosting, but you would sometimes get a little bit of flare. And, I guess that wouldn't be unusual, considering the fact that you are using a lens with a maximum aperture of f/0.95. By the time I stopped down to, let's say, f2, all that disappeared. And in some situations, particularly when I was photographing a three-dimensional object or with some depth, it was beneficial to stop the lens down quite a bit more. So the one thing I also did was, with the fence photo, I took it at 3 f-stops. So one was all the way open at 0.95, the second one was at f5.6, and then the third one was at f16. I thought that would be nice to be able to show the progression of depth of field, or apparent depth of field. In some cases, the backgrounds come out a bit harsh, but I think that's true of any of these super fast lenses. Once you get below 1.4, is that sometimes the backgrounds can be not that smooth, out of focus background that people love. I haven't used the Noct Deluxe, so I can't really speak to that. So now let's get back to the rest of the video. As with any new lens, it's always a bit more difficult to talk about the longevity of the lens because you just don't know. With this lens just being less than a few weeks old, how will it be in 5 years? Or how will it be in 1 month? 1 month, probably not much of a change. How about next year? How about 3 years? How about 5 years? How about 15 years? Will it still focus as smoothly as it does today? How will it wear? How will the lens coating hold up? You know, so lots of questions. But that price, I mean, it's such a low price, you really can't complain. And even if you only get, let's say, 5 years use out of it, I mean, that's a pretty good darn bargain. Considering, I can't remember what I paid for this lens, but it probably was $300 to $400. And obviously this lens is not given away either. So would I recommend this lens? Yes, I would. Yes, I would. But keep in mind the fact that there is no long-term history of this lens, but it's also balanced by the relatively low price. At a price less than $200 in 2024, this makes a great all-purpose lens. And that's my wrap on the TTArtisan f0.95 35mm lens for APS cameras. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if there's anything you'd like me to cover in the future, let me know in the comments below or send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And see you on the next video.